The water ran cold over Mary Ellen's hands as she scrubbed her father's work shirt against the smooth river stones, and she had just wrung out the fabric when she heard the thunder of hooves behind her, and knew with absolute certainty that her life was about to change forever. She turned slowly, water dripping from her fingers, and saw 5 men on horseback emerging from the cottonwood trees that lined the riverbank. The afternoon sun of May 1878 cast long shadows across the desert landscape outside Belmont, Nevada, and those shadows seemed to stretch toward her like grasping fingers. The men wore dusty trail clothes and had bandanas pulled up over their faces, and the way they spread out in a semicircle told Mary she was not looking at honest travelers. "Well, well," the largest one said, his voice muffled behind the red cloth covering his nose and mouth. "What do we have here?" "Pretty little thing all alone by the water." Mary's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to stand tall. At 21 years old, she had lived in Nevada mining country long enough to know that showing fear to men like these was the worst thing she could do. Her basket of wet laundry sat at her feet, her father's shirts and her own simple dresses heavy with river water. "My father is just up the hill," she said, keeping her voice steady even as she calculated the distance to the nearest cover. "He will be back any moment." The men laughed, a sound that made her skin crawl. The leader swung down from his horse with practiced ease, his boots splashing in the shallow water at the river's edge. "That's so. Funny, we have been watching this spot for an hour now, and we have not seen hide nor hair of anyone but you." He took a step closer, and Mary could smell the whiskey on him even from several feet away. "Been a long time since we had conversation with a lady." Mary took a step backward, her mind racing through her limited options. The town of Belmont was nearly 2 miles away, too far to run. Her father really was working at the silver mine on the far side of the hill, and he would not return until sunset. She had her washing to do, and the river was the best spot for it, so she had walked out alone as she did every week. "I have nothing of value," she said, taking another step back. The water was behind her now, gurgling over rocks as it always did, indifferent to her fear. "Oh, I would not say that," another man said, dismounting. He was thin as a rail with cold eyes visible above his bandana. "Pretty girl like you is worth plenty in the right circumstances." The words sent ice through Mary's veins. She had heard stories of women taken by outlaws, sold across state lines or worse. Her hand moved to her pocket where she kept her small sewing scissors, hardly a weapon but the only thing she had. "Stay back," she warned, pulling the scissors free. They looked pathetically small in her shaking hand. The leader laughed again and took another step forward. Mary braced herself, knowing she would fight even if it was hopeless, knowing she would rather drown in the river behind her than let these men take her. That was when the shot rang out. The bullet struck the water between Mary and the advancing bandit, sending up a spray that caught the sunlight like diamonds. Every man froze, and Mary's head snapped toward the source of the shot. A rider sat atop a dun-colored horse on the opposite bank of the river, a Winchester rifle still raised to his shoulder. He was silhouetted against the bright Nevada sky, but Mary could make out a broad-shouldered figure in a dark hat and duster coat. The horse stood absolutely still, and the man's aim never wavered. The lady said, "Stay back," the newcomer called out, his voice carrying easily across the water. It was a rich baritone, calm and controlled with an edge of steel beneath it. "I suggest you listen." The bandit leader's hand moved toward his gun, but another shot cracked through the air, this one taking his hat clean off his head. The man yelped and stumbled backward, his hand flying away from his weapon. "Next one goes through your gun hand," the rider said, working the lever action of his rifle with smooth efficiency. Then your shooting partner there loses his. After that, things get less pleasant. Your choice." Mary stood frozen, her scissors still clutched in her hand, as she watched the scene unfold. The stranger nudged his horse forward into the water, rifle never leaving his shoulder, eyes never leaving the 5 men who suddenly looked far less confident than they had moments before. "You know who we ride with?" the thin man demanded, trying to salvage some bravado. "Pike Delaney does not take kindly to interference." "Pike Delaney is a coward who sends men to terrorize women doing laundry," the rider replied, his horse now halfway across the river. The water came up to the animal's knees, but it moved forward steadily, completely calm despite the tension crackling through the air. "If Pike has an issue with me defending innocent people, he is welcome to come find me himself. Name is Kyle Brennan. He can ask around Belmont if he wants to know where I am staying." The name meant nothing to Mary, but it clearly meant something to the bandits. The leader's eyes widened slightly above his bandana, and he exchanged glances with his companions. "Brennan," he repeated, and some of the bluster went out of his voice. "We did not know anyone was around. We were just passing through, saw the lady, thought we would say hello." "You thought wrong," Kyle Brennan said flatly. His horse emerged from the river on Mary's side, water streaming from its legs. Up close, Mary could see him more clearly now. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with a strong jaw shadowed with a few days' stubble and eyes the color of storm clouds. A silver star was pinned to his vest, partially visible beneath his open coat. "Now mount up and ride out. If I see any of you within 10 miles of Belmont, I will assume you are looking for trouble, and I will be happy to provide it." The bandits did not need to be told twice. They scrambled onto their horses, the leader snatching his hat from the ground without dismounting, and within moments they were thundering back into the cottonwoods. Mary watched them go, her heart still pounding, unable to quite believe what had just happened. Kyle Brennan lowered his rifle and stepped down from his horse in one fluid motion. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with the lean, rangy build of a man who spent his life in the saddle. His clothes were well worn but clean, and the gun belt around his hips sat with the easy familiarity of someone who knew how to use it. "You all right, miss?" he asked, his voice gentler now that the threat had passed. His eyes scanned her face with genuine concern. Mary realized she was still holding her scissors in a white-knuckled grip. She forced her fingers to relax and put them back in her pocket. "Yes," she said, and was surprised her voice came out steady. "Yes, I am fine. Thank you. If you had not come when you did, I do not know what would have happened." "Best not to dwell on it," he said, though his expression suggested he knew exactly what would have happened. He glanced at her basket of wet laundry, then at the town in the distance. "You came out here alone." "I do every week," Mary said, feeling suddenly foolish. "The river is the best place to wash, and I have never had trouble before." "Times are changing," Kyle said. He picked up her basket as if it weighed nothing despite the heavy wet fabric inside. "Pike Delaney's gang has been working this area for the past month. They hit a stagecoach near Virginia City last week, and there has been talk of them moving south. You were lucky I was scouting the area." "You are a lawman," Mary said, noticing the star again now that he was turned toward her. "Deputy U.S. Marshal," he confirmed. "Been tracking Delaney for 3 months now. He is getting bolder, which means he is getting desperate, which makes him more dangerous." He looked at her seriously. "You should not come out here alone anymore, not until we round up his gang." Mary felt a flash of irritation despite her gratitude. "I have chores to do, Marshal. My father and I cannot afford to pay someone else to do our washing, and the water in town is scarce. We need every drop for drinking and cooking." Something flickered in his eyes, respect perhaps. "I understand," But being practical does not help if you are dead or worse. He paused, then added, "What if I rode out with you? When you need to do washing, you send word to the marshal's office in town, and I will make sure you get here and back safely." Mary stared at him. "You would do that?" "Take time from hunting outlaws to guard a laundress. Protecting people is hunting outlaws," Kyle said simply. "Delaney and his kind thrive when regular folks are too scared to live their lives. Besides, keeping you safe seems like time well spent." There was something in the way he said it, something in his steady gray eyes that made heat rise in Mary's cheeks. She looked away, busying herself with wringing out another shirt from her basket. "I could not ask you to do that," she said. "You did not ask, I offered." He smiled for the first time, and it transformed his serious face into something warm and almost boyish. "Besides, it gives me a good reason to patrol this area regular-like. Two birds with one stone." Mary found herself smiling back despite the fear still thrumming through her system. "Well, when you put it that way, I suppose it would be rude to refuse." "Very rude," he agreed solemnly, though his eyes sparkled with humor. "I am Kyle Brennan, by the way, though I suppose you heard that already." "Mary Ellen," she replied. "Mary Ellen Edwards. My father is Thomas Edwards." "He works at the Union Mine," Kyle nodded. "I have seen him around town. Good man from what I hear." He glanced at the sun, which was starting its descent toward the western mountains. "We should get you back before it gets later. Can I give you a ride? My horse can carry two and your laundry." Mary hesitated. Riding with a man she had just met, even one who had saved her, seemed improper. But then again, being practical outweighed propriety, and she was exhausted from the fear and adrenaline of the past few minutes. "Thank you," she said. "That would be kind." Kyle secured her basket behind his saddle with practiced efficiency, then held out his hand to help her mount. His grip was strong and calloused, the hand of a man who worked for a living. He swung up behind her with easy grace, and Mary found herself acutely aware of his presence at her back, his arms on either side of her as he gathered the reins. "Comfortable?" he asked, his voice closer now, and Mary could feel the warmth of his breath on her hair. "Yes," she managed, though comfortable was not quite the word for the strange awareness coursing through her. The horse moved forward at an easy walk, following the river path toward Belmont. The town had sprung up during the silver boom of the 1860s and had grown into a proper community with a courthouse, several saloons, general stores, and about 2,000 residents at its peak. Now, in 1878, some of that initial boom had faded, but Belmont remained the county seat and a hub of mining activity. "How long have you been in Belmont?" Kyle asked as they rode, his tone conversational, as if they were old acquaintances out for a pleasant ride rather than two strangers thrown together by violence. 5 years, Mary replied. "We came from Missouri after my mother passed. Father heard there was good work in the mines here, and he was right. We have a small house on the east side of town." "Missouri," Kyle repeated. "Long way from home." "Nevada is home now," Mary said, and meant it. Despite the harsh landscape and the hard life, she had come to love the wide open spaces and the brilliant stars at night. "What about you? Where are you from?" "Texas originally," he said, "but I have been moving around for the past 8 years. Took up the badge 5 years back in Arizona Territory. Turned out I had a knack for tracking and the Marshal Service was hiring." "Do you like it? The work, I mean?" Kyle was quiet for a moment. "Most days," he said finally. "I like that I can make a difference, help people who cannot help themselves. Days like today make it worthwhile." He paused. "But it is a hard life. Lonely sometimes, dangerous always." Mary heard something beneath the words, a weariness that spoke of too many long trails and too many close calls. "Have you ever thought about settling down? More and more lately, he admitted. The sun caught the silver in his badge, making it flash. I am not getting any younger, and I have seen enough men in this line of work who waited too long. They end up alone, bitter, or dead. He shifted slightly in the saddle. Truth is, I have been thinking about finding a place to put down roots. Maybe start a ranch if I can save enough. Somewhere quiet where I can raise horses instead of chasing outlaws. That sounds nice, Mary said softly. She could picture it easily. This strong, quiet man working with horses, building something lasting instead of constantly moving. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the gurgle of the river the only sounds. The town of Belmont gradually grew closer, its buildings taking shape against the desert backdrop. Smoke rose from chimneys as families prepared supper, and Mary could see people moving along the main street. "Your father," Kyle said as they neared the edge of town. "Will he be worried that you are arriving with a strange man?" Mary smiled. "He will be more worried that I was in danger in the first place, but once I explain what happened, he will want to thank you properly. You should come to supper tomorrow night if you are free. It is the least we can do." Kyle was quiet for a moment, and Mary wondered if she had overstepped. Then he said, "I would like that very much. Thank you." They reached the small wooden house that Mary shared with her father just as the sun touched the horizon. Kyle helped her down from the horse, then retrieved her basket and carried it to the porch. His hands brushed hers as he transferred the weight, and Mary felt that strange awareness again, a warmth that had nothing to do with the Nevada heat. "Tomorrow, then?" she asked, looking up at him. Up close, she could see the tiny lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, the small scar on his jaw that she had not noticed before. "Tomorrow," he confirmed. He touched the brim of his hat in farewell. "And Mary, be careful. Stay close to town and people you trust. Delaney's men know you saw them now, and they might hold a grudge." The reminder sent a chill through her, but she nodded. "I will be careful." She watched him ride away, his silhouette dark against the orange sky, and wondered at the strange turn her ordinary day had taken. This morning, she had been simply Mary Ellen Edwards, miner's daughter, making her way through another week. Now she was Mary Ellen Edwards, who had been threatened by outlaws and saved by a handsome marshal who would be coming to supper tomorrow night. Her father arrived home an hour later, exhausted from his shift underground. Thomas Edwards was a solid man in his late 40s with graying hair and the perpetually stained hands of someone who worked with ore. When Mary told him what had happened, his face went white, then red with anger. "Those bastards," he swore, pulling her into a tight hug. "If anything had happened to you, Mary girl, I do not know what I would have done." "But nothing did happen," she assured him, hugging him back. "Marshal Brennan was there, and he made them leave. He has offered to escort me when I need to go to the river until the gang is caught." Her father pulled back, studying her face. "This marshal, he is a good man." "I believe so," Mary said. "He did not have to help me, but he did, and he did not ask for anything in return." She hesitated, then added, "I invited him to supper tomorrow night. I hope that is all right." Thomas Edwards looked at his daughter for a long moment, and Mary had the distinct impression that he was seeing more than she intended to show. But all he said was, "Of course it is all right. Any man who protects my daughter is welcome at my table." That night, Mary lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of Belmont at night. Dogs barking, the tinny notes of a piano from one of the saloons, the occasional shout or laugh. She thought about Kyle Brennan, about his steady gray eyes and the calm way he had faced down 5 armed men, about the gentleness in his voice when he asked if she was all right, and the way his smile had transformed his face. She told herself she was being foolish. He was a lawman passing through, and she was just another person he had helped in the course of his duties. Tomorrow's supper was a simple thank you, nothing more. But as she drifted off to sleep, she could not stop thinking about the way his hands had felt holding hers, or the warmth of his presence at her back as they rode home together. The next day passed with agonizing slowness. Mary cleaned the house from top to bottom, swept the porch, and carefully planned the supper menu. They did not have much, but she could make a decent stew with the vegetables from their small garden and some of the salt pork from the general store. She even used some of their precious sugar to make biscuits, something she usually saved for Sundays. Her father watched her preparations with amusement. "It is just supper, Mary girl," he said, as she fretted over whether the table looked presentable. "I know that," she replied, but she checked the placement of the forks again anyway. Kyle arrived precisely at 6 o'clock, which Mary had learned to recognize by the church bell that rang the hour. He had cleaned up since yesterday, his face freshly shaved and his hair still damp from washing. He wore a clean shirt under his vest, and he had left his rifle with his horse, though his gun belt remained buckled at his hips. "Mr. Edwards," he said, shaking her father's hand, "it is an honor to meet you." "The honor is mine, Marshal," Thomas replied. "My daughter told me what you did yesterday. I cannot thank you enough." "Just doing my job," Kyle said, but Mary noticed the way his eyes sought her out, the small smile that touched his lips when their gazes met. Supper was a surprisingly relaxed affair. Kyle had an easy manner that put her father at ease, and they talked about mining and horses and the growth of Nevada territory. He asked Thomas about his work with genuine interest and listened attentively to the answers, and Mary could see her father warming to the younger man. "Mary's mother would have liked you," Thomas said eventually, his voice growing softer. "She always said you could measure a man by how he treated folks who could not do him any good. You did not have to help Mary yesterday. There was no reward in it, no glory, but you did it anyway." Kyle's expression grew serious. "With respect, Mr. Edwards, I disagree. The reward was knowing Mary got home safely. That is worth more than gold to me." The words hung in the air, and Mary felt heat rise in her cheeks. Her father looked between them, a knowing look entering his eyes. "Well," Thomas said, pushing back from the table, "I think I will step outside for a smoke, getting too old to sit still for long after a day in the mines. You two young people take your time with dessert." He disappeared onto the porch with a transparency that would have been funny if Mary had not been so flustered. Kyle met her eyes across the table, and she saw her own awareness reflected there. "Your father is a good man," he said quietly. "Yes, he is," Mary agreed. She stood and began clearing the dishes, needing something to do with her hands. Kyle rose to help her, and they worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, moving around each other in the small space of the kitchen. "Mary," Kyle said finally, setting down the plate he had been holding, "I know we only just met, but I need to tell you something." Mary's heart began to beat faster. "What is it?" "Yesterday, when I saw those men threatening you, something happened inside me. It was not just about doing my job or protecting an innocent person." He took a step closer, his gray eyes intense. "I have done this work for 5 years now. I have helped a lot of people, stopped a lot of bad men, but I have never felt the way I felt when I saw you in danger." "How did you feel?" Mary asked softly. "Terrified," he said honestly. "And then afterward, when I was sure you were safe, I felt something else. Something I have not felt in a long time, maybe never." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. "I know this is fast. I know it is probably crazy, but I would like to see you again. Not just as part of keeping you safe, but because I want to know you. I want to know everything about you." Mary looked down at their joined hands, his so much larger than hers, rough with calluses but infinitely gentle. "I want that too," she admitted. "When you rode away yesterday, I felt like something was leaving with you. Something I did not know I was missing until I found it." Kyle smiled, that wonderful transforming smile that made him look younger and more carefree. "Then we are in agreement," he said, "because I felt exactly the same way." He stayed for another hour, and they talked about everything and nothing. Mary told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her mother's death from fever and the hard journey west. Kyle shared stories of his life as a marshal, the towns he had seen, the people he had met. They discovered they both loved watching the stars at night, both preferred horses to most people, and both had a weakness for good coffee. When he finally left, he held her hand for a long moment on the porch. "I will be by tomorrow to take you to church if you are going," he said. "And then maybe we could take a walk. I promise to keep it proper and public." "I would like that," Mary said, smiling up at him. She watched him ride away into the darkness, her hand still warm from his touch. Her father appeared at her elbow, puffing on his pipe. "That is a good man, Mary girl," he said quietly, "but his work is dangerous. If you let yourself care for him, you need to understand what that means." "I know," Mary said, "but Papa, I think it might be too late to stop myself from caring." Thomas put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "Then I will pray he stays safe, and that he is smart enough to hold on to what he is finding with you." The next few weeks fell into a pattern that felt both exhilarating and frightening in its intensity. Kyle came by every morning before his patrols, often bringing fresh coffee from the hotel or wildflowers he had picked on his rides. They walked together through town, talking and laughing, while the people of Belmont watched with interest. True to his word, Kyle escorted Mary to the river when she needed to do washing, sitting on the bank with his rifle across his knees while she worked. They talked the whole time, conversations that ranged from silly to serious, and Mary found herself looking forward to washing day for the first time in her life. He took her to church on Sundays, sitting beside her in the pew with his hat in his hands, and afterward they would walk through the desert together, always within sight of town but far enough away to feel private. He told her about his dream of ranching, of breeding horses and building something permanent. She told him about her secret wish to write, about the stories she composed in her head as she did her chores. "You should write them down," he said one afternoon as they sat on a flat rock overlooking the valley. "The world needs more stories, especially ones written by people who understand real life." "Maybe someday," Mary said, "when we have money for extra paper and ink." Kyle was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "If I had money, I would buy you a whole roomful of paper. I would want to read every story you wrote." Mary felt tears prick her eyes at the simple sweetness of the statement. "If you had money, you would buy your ranch and your horses." "I would do both," he said firmly, taking her hand. "A man can have more than one dream, Mary." It was during their third week of courtship that Kyle first kissed her. They were walking back from the river, leading his horse between them, when Mary stumbled on a loose rock. Kyle caught her easily, his hands strong on her arms, and suddenly they were standing very close together, the horse forgotten behind them. "Mary," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "May I kiss you?" In answer, she rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his. It was sweet and gentle and perfect, and when they pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I am falling in love with you," Kyle said, resting his forehead against hers. "I know it is too soon to say it, but it is the truth, and I have always believed in speaking the truth." "It is not too soon," Mary whispered. "Not when I am falling in love with you too." They stood there for a long moment, the Nevada sun beating down on them, the future stretching out like the endless desert horizon. Mary had never been happier, never felt more alive, and she could see the same joy reflected in Kyle's eyes. But happiness, she was learning, was often fragile. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in June when Kyle did not arrive for their usual morning walk. Mary waited on the porch, worry growing in her chest until her father left for the mine. An hour passed, then two, and still no sign of Kyle. Finally, unable to stand the waiting anymore, Mary walked into town to the marshal's office. She found the door locked and the windows dark. The general store owner, Mr. Peterson, saw her confused expression and called out from across the street. "If you are looking for Marshal Brennan, he rode out before dawn. Got word that Pike Delaney was spotted near Silver Peak. He and the sheriff took a posse after him." Mary's heart sank. Silver Peak was a full day's ride to the south, and if there was shooting, if Kyle was in danger, she would not know for days. She walked home slowly, trying to calm the fear churning in her stomach. The next 3 days were the longest of Mary's life. She went through her routines mechanically, cooking and cleaning and trying not to imagine all the terrible things that could happen to a lawman chasing outlaws. Her father tried to comfort her, but they both knew the statistics. Too many lawmen died in the line of duty, and Pike Delaney was known for his ruthlessness. On the 4th day, riders appeared on the horizon. Mary was in the garden when she saw them, and her heart leaped into her throat as she counted the shapes. 6 men on horses, one of them slumped in the saddle. She dropped her watering pail and ran. The posse made its way down the main street, drawing townspeople from their homes and businesses. Mary pushed through the growing crowd, her eyes desperately scanning the riders until she found him. Kyle sat tall on his dun horse, dusty and exhausted but alive. The slumped figure was one of the other deputies, wounded but alive from what Mary could see. Kyle's eyes found hers in the crowd, and his exhausted face broke into a smile. He dismounted stiffly, and Mary did not care who was watching as she threw herself into his arms. "I am all right," he murmured into her hair, holding her tight. "I am all right, Mary." "I was so worried," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought I might never see you again." "It takes more than Pike Delaney to keep me from you," he said, pulling back to look at her face. His own was lined with exhaustion and marked with several days' worth of stubble, but his eyes were bright and alive. "We got him, Mary. His whole gang is either dead or in custody. It is over." The relief was so intense it made her dizzy. "Over," she repeated. "Really over, really over," he confirmed. Then, right there in the middle of the street with half of Belmont watching, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her soundly. When he pulled back, he was grinning despite his exhaustion. "I have been wanting to do that for 4 days." The watching townspeople cheered and whistled, and Mary felt her face flame red, but she did not care. Kyle was alive and safe, and that was all that mattered. That night, after Kyle had slept for several hours and cleaned himself up, he came to the Edwards house for supper. He looked more like himself now, though Mary could see the shadows in his eyes that spoke of what he had seen and done in the past 4 days. "It was a hard fight," he told them over the meal. "Delaney did not go quietly. 2 of his men are dead and Deputy Williams took a bullet in the shoulder, but we got them all and no innocent people were hurt. That is what matters." "What happens now?" Thomas asked, and Mary heard the question beneath the question. "What happens with you and my daughter?" Kyle set down his fork and looked at Mary, then at her father. "If I am being honest, Mr. Edwards, I have been thinking hard on my future. This past week, when we were tracking Delaney through some rough country, I kept thinking about what I would be riding back to. And what I realized is that I have something here I have never had before. Someone to come home to. A reason to be careful, to not take stupid risks." He reached across the table and took Mary's hand. "I have saved almost every dollar I have earned for the past 5 years. It is enough to buy land, to start small with horses. I have been thinking I might resign from the marshal service, put down those roots I have been talking about." Mary's heart was beating so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Are you sure? I know how much you care about the work you do." "I do care about it," Kyle agreed, "but I care about you more, and I have been at this long enough to know that I have been lucky so far. Eventually that luck runs out." His eyes were serious now, the gray gone almost dark. "I want a future, Mary. I want to build something that lasts. I want to do that with you if you will have me." Thomas Edwards cleared his throat gruffly. "Son, are you asking my daughter to marry you?" Kyle smiled. "Not yet, sir. I have not saved quite enough to feel right about it. Another few months, maybe by fall, I will have enough put by to buy land and build a house. Then I would like to ask her properly, with a ring and a real future to offer." "What if I do not care about the money or the land?" Mary asked softly. "What if all I care about is you?" "Then you would be a fool," Kyle said gently. "And you are not a fool, Mary Edwards. You deserve a man who can provide for you properly, who can give you security and a real home." "I want to be that man, but I need a little more time to get there." Mary understood what he was saying, and she loved him even more for his caution and responsibility. But she also knew with absolute certainty that she would marry him today if he asked, ranch or no ranch, money or no money. "Then I will wait," she said. "However long it takes." Kyle brought her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "It will not be long," he promised. "I swear to you, Mary, before the year is out, you will be my wife if you will have me." The next months were some of the happiest of Mary's life. Kyle did resign from the marshal service, taking a temporary job as deputy sheriff in Belmont, while he saved the last of his money and looked for the right piece of land. He was still doing law work, but it was local and generally safer, dealing more with drunks and disputes than with gun battles and outlaw chases. They spent every spare moment together, and the whole town watched their courtship with indulgent interest. Kyle was well liked in Belmont, respected for his work capturing the Delaney gang, and people were happy to see him settling down. More than one old-timer offered advice on ranching and horse breeding, and Kyle listened to all of it with careful attention. In August, he found his land. It was 160 acres about 5 miles from Belmont, with a natural spring that provided reliable water and enough grazing to support a decent herd. The price was reasonable because the previous owner had moved back east after his wife died, and Kyle was able to purchase it outright with the money he had saved. "Come see it," he said to Mary one Sunday after church, his eyes bright with excitement. "I want you to see what will be ours." They rode out together, her father coming along as chaperone, and Mary fell in love with the place immediately. The land rolled gently, dotted with sage and juniper, and the spring fed a small creek that would keep everything green even in the dry Nevada summers. In her mind's eye, she could already see the house they would build, the corrals for horses, the garden she would plant. "What do you think?" Kyle asked, watching her face anxiously. "I think it is perfect," Mary said honestly. "I think we will be very happy here." Kyle pulled something from his pocket, a small box that made Mary's breath catch. He dropped to one knee right there on their land, with her father watching and the Nevada sun blazing down. "Mary Ellen Edwards," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I know we have only known each other for a few months, but they have been the best months of my life. You make me want to be a better man, to build something lasting and good. Will you marry me? Will you help me build a life on this land and be my wife and my partner in everything?" "Yes," Mary said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Kyle, I will marry you." The ring was simple, a thin gold band with a small sapphire that caught the light. It fit perfectly, and as Kyle slid it onto her finger, Mary knew she was the luckiest woman in Nevada. They were married in September, on a beautiful fall day when the heat of summer had finally broken. The whole town turned out for the wedding, which was held at the small church in Belmont. Mary wore her mother's wedding dress, which she had altered to fit, and carried wildflowers that Kyle had picked that morning. Thomas Edwards walked his daughter down the aisle with tears in his eyes, and when he placed Mary's hand in Kyle's, he said quietly, "Take care of my girl." "With my life," Kyle promised, and Mary knew he meant it. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Kyle kissed her with such tenderness that more than one woman in the congregation wiped away tears. They walked back down the aisle together as Mr. and Mrs. Kyle Brennan, and Mary felt like her heart might burst with happiness. The town held a celebration in their honor, with food and music and dancing in the street. Kyle whirled Mary around until she was dizzy with laughter, and later, when they finally slipped away to begin their new life together, the whole town cheered them on their way. Their first year of marriage was hard work but deeply satisfying. Kyle built their house with his own hands, with help from Thomas and other men from town. It was not large, but it was solid and well made, with a big kitchen for Mary and a wide porch where they could sit and watch the sunset. They lived in a small cabin on the property while the house was being built, and Mary would always remember those months with fondness. The cabin was cramped and drafty, but every night she fell asleep in Kyle's arms, and that made it paradise. Kyle was good with horses, just as he had claimed. He bought 3 mares and a stallion to start his breeding program, and within a year, he had built a reputation for quality animals. Ranchers and miners came from all over the region to look at his stock, and more often than not they went home with a new horse and a recommendation to tell their friends about Brennan's ranch. Mary planted her garden and tended their chickens and learned to cook over an open fire when they were still in the cabin. She wrote her stories in the evenings by lamplight while Kyle worked on tack or read from the newspaper. They were building something together, something real and lasting, and every day Mary thanked God for the bandits who had come to the river that day and changed her life forever. In the spring of 1879, Mary realized she was pregnant. She told Kyle one evening as they sat on the porch of their new house, watching the stars come out. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. Kyle's face went through a series of emotions so quickly that Mary almost laughed. Shock, joy, fear, and wonder all flickered across his features before settling into a smile so bright it could have lit the night sky. "A baby," he repeated, his voice full of awe. "Our baby. Mary, are you sure?" "I am sure," she said. "Mrs. Peterson confirmed it this morning. She thinks the baby will come in November." Kyle pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "I am going to be a father," he whispered into her hair. "I never thought I would have this, Mary. A wife, a home, a child on the way. I thought men like me did not get this kind of happiness." "You deserve it," Mary said fiercely. "You deserve all the happiness in the world, Kyle Brennan." The pregnancy was not easy. Mary suffered from terrible nausea in the early months, and as summer arrived, the heat made her miserable. But Kyle was endlessly patient and tender, doing whatever he could to make her comfortable. He took over more of the heavy chores, hired a woman from town to help with the washing and cleaning, and sat with Mary during her worst days, reading aloud or simply holding her hand. Thomas Edwards was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a grandfather. He had moved into a small room Kyle had built onto the house, no longer able to work in the mines due to his failing health, but still strong enough to help around the ranch. He whittled toys for the coming baby and told Mary stories of when she was small, and Mary felt her mother's absence keenly, but was grateful her father would be there to meet his grandchild. In November, on a cold night with the first snow of winter falling outside, Mary went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Kyle feared he would lose her. But she was strong, stronger than he had ever imagined, and as dawn broke over the Nevada desert, the thin, furious wail of a newborn filled the house. "A boy," the midwife announced, placing the squalling infant in Mary's arms. "A healthy, strong boy." Kyle looked down at his wife and son, his eyes bright with tears. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Mary, you are amazing. He is perfect." They named him Thomas Edwards Brennan, after Mary's father, and the old man wept openly when they told him. Little Tommy had his mother's dark hair and his father's gray eyes, and from the beginning, he had a fierce determination that suggested he had inherited both parents' strength of will. The years that followed were full and rich. Kyle's horse ranch prospered, and they added cattle to their operation. Mary got her paper and ink and filled notebook after notebook with stories, some of which she even sold to the local newspaper. Tommy grew into a sturdy, active boy who loved the horses as much as his father did, and followed him around the ranch like a shadow. In 1881, Mary gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Catherine Rose after Kyle's mother. Katie was as sweet-natured as her brother was rambunctious, with her father's coloring and her mother's delicate features. Kyle doted on both children outrageously, and more than once Mary found him asleep in the nursery, sitting in the rocking chair with a baby in his arms. Thomas Edwards lived to see both grandchildren born, and to know they would be raised in love and security. He passed quietly in his sleep in the winter of 1882, and they buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch with a view of the mountains he had loved. Kyle held Mary while she cried, and later, when the children were asleep, he took her to the porch where they had sat so many times. "He was proud of you," Kyle said quietly. "He told me once that sending you to the river that day was the best decision he ever made because it brought me into your life and you into mine." Mary smiled through her tears. "He said that, he did, about a week before he died. He said he could leave this world happy knowing you were loved and cared for." Kyle pulled her closer. "I made him a promise, Mary. I promised him I would love you every day for the rest of my life, that I would make sure you never regretted choosing me." "I could never regret it," Mary said firmly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Kyle Brennan. You and our children and this life we have built together." The ranch continued to grow and prosper. By the mid-1880s, the Brennan Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the region. They employed several hands, and their horses were sought after throughout Nevada and into California. Kyle had built everything he had dreamed of and more, and he never forgot how close he had come to missing it all. Sometimes, when he rode past the spot by the river where he had first seen Mary, he would stop and say a silent prayer of thanks. He had been tracking outlaws, just doing his job with no expectation of anything beyond bringing criminals to justice. Instead, he had found the woman who would become his whole world, the mother of his children, his partner in building a life that meant something. In 1886, their third child arrived, another boy they named Samuel. Sam was the easygoing one, content to sit and watch while his older siblings raced around the ranch. He had Mary's thoughtful nature and Kyle's steady temperament, and from early on, it was clear he would be the peacemaker of the family. Tommy was 8 now, already helping with the horses in earnest, and Katie was 5, following her mother around and learning to cook and garden. The house was always full of noise and activity, and Kyle would not have had it any other way. One evening in 1888, as they celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary, Kyle and Mary sat on their porch watching the sunset. The children were inside with one of the ranch hands who had agreed to watch them for the evening, and for the first time in months, they had time alone together. 10 years, Mary said wonderingly. It feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean, Kyle replied. He had his arm around her shoulders and she was nestled against his side, their bodies fitting together as naturally as breathing. Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life, that I get to wake up next to you every morning, watch our children grow, work land that is ours. Do you ever miss it? Mary asked. The martial work, the adventure. Kyle was quiet for a moment, considering. Sometimes I miss the feeling of making a clear difference, of knowing I stopped bad men from hurting good people. But then I think about what I have here, what we have built together, and I know I made the right choice. This is making a difference too, raising good children, building a business that employs people, being part of a community. It is just a different kind of difference. He turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious. And Mary, if I had stayed a marshal, I would have missed all of this. I would have missed watching Tommy take his first steps, hearing Katie's first word, holding Sam when he was born. I would have missed 1,000 mornings waking up next to you and 1,000 evenings watching the sunset together. No amount of adventure is worth that trade. Mary kissed him softly. I love you, Kyle Brennan. I loved you that first day by the river, and I love you more with every day that passes. I love you too, he said. More than words can say. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple, the desert landscape spread out before them. Somewhere inside, they could hear their children laughing, the sound of home and family and everything they had built together. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and growth. The children grew older, each developing their own personalities and interests. Tommy became a skilled horseman like his father, with plans to take over the ranch someday. Katie discovered a talent for drawing and painting, filling sketchbooks with images of ranch life and the Nevada landscape. Sam surprised everyone by developing a passion for books and learning, and they began saving money to send him to college in California when he was old enough. In 1892, Mary published her first collection of stories, a slim volume printed by a publisher in San Francisco who had read her newspaper pieces. It was a modest success, but Mary treasured every copy, especially the one Kyle kept on his nightstand and reread constantly. I am so proud of you, he told her the night the first copies arrived. You worked so hard for this, and you deserve every bit of success that comes. I could not have done it without you, Mary said honestly. You always believed I could do this, even when I doubted myself. You made space for my writing, took on extra work so I would have time. This book is as much yours as mine. Kyle shook his head. The words are all yours. I just provided the quiet and the encouragement. You have real talent, Mary. The world should hear your stories. By 1895, the Brennan Ranch was one of the largest horse operations in central Nevada. They had expanded their land holdings, built a beautiful 2-story house to replace the original one, and employed a dozen full-time hands. Tommy, at 16, was already being groomed to take over the business. Katie, at 13, had won several prizes for her artwork. And Sam, at 9, was reading at a level well beyond his years. Kyle and Mary stood together one evening, watching their children gathered around the dinner table, arguing cheerfully about some trivial matter. Kyle was in his early 40s now, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes. Mary had just turned 38, still beautiful, still the woman he had fallen in love with by the river all those years ago. We did well, he said quietly. Look at them, Mary. Look at what we made together. We did very well, she agreed. Sometimes I think about that day by the river, about how different my life could have been if you had not been there. I think about it too, Kyle admitted. I was just doing my job, following a hunch about where the gang might be operating. I had no idea that day would change everything. But it did, Mary said. It changed everything for both of us. They kissed, a simple gesture that still held all the love and passion of their early courtship. Their children made exaggerated gagging noises and they broke apart laughing. "That is enough of that," Tommy said with mock severity. "We are trying to eat here." "When you find someone you love as much as I love your mother," Kyle told him, "you will understand. Until then, you will just have to tolerate your parents' scandalous behavior." The teasing and laughter that followed warmed Mary's heart. This was what she had always wanted, what she had dreamed of during those lonely years after her mother died. A family, a home filled with love and joy, and the knowledge that they belonged to each other. The turn of the century brought changes to Nevada and to the Brennan family. The mining boom that had built Belmont was fading, and many families moved away seeking opportunity elsewhere. The Brennans stayed, their ranch prospering even as the town shrank. They had put down roots too deep to abandon, and this land was home in a way nowhere else could be. Tommy married in 1901, wedding a girl from Austin named Helen who loved the ranch almost as much as he did. They built a house on the far side of the property and began their own family, giving Kyle and Mary their first grandchildren. Katie left for San Francisco to study art, breaking their hearts even as they supported her dreams. She promised to return, and they believed her, knowing she carried Nevada in her blood. Sam went east to college, his brilliant mind earning him a scholarship to study law, and sent letters home filled with enthusiasm for his studies. By 1905, Kyle was 52 and Mary was 48. They were grandparents 4 times over, with more on the way. The ranch was thriving under Tommy's enthusiastic management, freeing Kyle to take on more advisory roles and spend more time with Mary. They traveled a little, taking trips to San Francisco to visit Katie and even venturing as far as Boston to see Sam graduate from law school. But they always returned to Nevada, to their ranch and the life they had built there. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before, Mary turned to Kyle with a serious expression. "You have any regrets?" she asked. "About the life you chose, the things you gave up?" Kyle thought about it carefully, wanting to give her an honest answer. "I regret the years before I met you," he said finally. "I regret the time I spent alone, thinking that was all there was for men like me. But everything after that day by the river, I would not change a single moment." He took her hand, his thumb tracing over her knuckles. "You gave me everything, Mary. A home, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving. You gave me reasons to wake up smiling and go to sleep grateful. If I could go back and tell that young Marshall what his life would become, he would never believe me. He would think it was too good to be true." "But it is true," Mary said softly. "All of it is real and true in ours." "Yes," Kyle agreed, "and I thank God for it every single day." They sat together as the stars came out, one by one, until the Nevada sky was ablaze with light. Inside, they could hear their grandchildren playing, Tommy and Helen's voices raised in gentle correction or encouragement. The ranch was quiet except for the occasional whinny of a horse or the bark of a dog. This was their legacy, Kyle thought. Not just the land or the horses or the buildings they had constructed. Their real legacy was the family they had created, the love they had nurtured, the life they had built from nothing but determination and hope. "I love you, Mary Brennan," he said into the darkness. "I love you too, Kyle," she replied. "Today and always." The years continued their steady march forward. More grandchildren arrived, and the original three began to have children of their own, making Kyle and Mary great-grandparents. The ranch passed fully to Tommy, though Kyle remained involved as an advisor and mentor. Mary continued to write, publishing 3 more collections of stories that found a loyal readership. Sam became a successful lawyer in San Francisco and married a teacher named Dorothy, while Katie returned to Nevada with a husband and children of her own, settling in Austin where she opened an art gallery. By 1920, Kyle was 67 and Mary was 63. They had lived through the turn of the century, survived the Spanish flu pandemic, and watched as Nevada transitioned from a frontier territory to a modern state. The world was changing rapidly, with automobiles and airplanes and technologies that would have seemed like magic when they first met. But some things remained constant. Their love for each other, tested and strengthened by 41 years of marriage, their pride in their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, their connection to the land they had built their life on. One spring morning, Mary woke to find Kyle already up and dressed, standing at their bedroom window looking out at the ranch. She joined him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how lucky I am," he said simply. About how one decision, one moment of being in the right place at the right time, changed everything. "You mean the day at the river," Mary said. "I mean the day at the river," he confirmed. "If I had ridden a different direction, if I had been even 10 minutes later, we never would have met. You would have lived a different life, and so would I. But you were not late," Mary pointed out. "You were exactly where you needed to be, exactly when you needed to be there. Maybe that is not luck, maybe that is something else." "Fate?" Kyle asked, smiling. "Love," Mary said. "I think love has its own magic, its own way of bringing people together who are meant to find each other." Kyle pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "Then I am grateful for love's magic, and for you, always for you." They spent the day as they spent most days now, with quiet companionship and simple pleasures. They walked around the ranch, greeted grandchildren who stopped by, and worked together in the garden Mary still tended. That evening, the whole family gathered for Sunday supper, a tradition that had started when the children were small and continued even now that those children had children and grandchildren of their own. The house was full of noise and laughter and the kind of chaos that comes from having 4 generations under one roof. Kyle sat at the head of the table with Mary beside him, and as he looked around at all the faces, young and old, he felt his heart swell with gratitude. "I want to say something," he announced, and the chatter gradually quieted. "Your grandmother and I have been married for 41 years now. We have built this ranch, raised 3 wonderful children, and been blessed with more grandchildren and great-grandchildren than we can count. We have had our share of hardship and loss, but mostly we have had joy." He reached for Mary's hand. "None of this would exist if not for one day in May of 1878, when I happened to be riding by a river and saw a young woman being threatened by outlaws. I did what any decent man would do, but what I got in return was far more than I deserved. I got a life partner, a best friend, and the love of my life. I got all of you." His voice thickened with emotion. "So I want you all to remember this. Remember that families are built on choices and chances and love. Remember to be grateful for what you have, and to never take for granted the people who matter most. And remember that sometimes the best things in life come from being in the right place at the right time and being brave enough to take action." Tommy stood and raised his glass. "To Mom and Dad, to 41 years of love and partnership, may we all be so lucky." "To Mom and Dad," the rest of the family chorused, and the sound of clinking glasses filled the air. Later, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Kyle and Mary sat on their porch one more time. It had become their ritual over the decades, this quiet time together at the end of the day. They did not always talk, but they were always together, and that was what mattered. "You remember what you were thinking that day by the river?" Mary asked. "Before you saw the bandits, I mean." "What was on your mind?" Kyle thought back across the decades to that hot May afternoon. "I was thinking about being tired," he said. "Tired of the trail, tired of always moving, tired of being alone. I remember thinking that I wanted something more, something permanent, but I did not know what that would look like." "And then you saw me," Mary said. "And then I saw you," Kyle agreed. "And suddenly I knew exactly what I wanted. It took me a while to admit it to myself, but that moment when I saw you in danger, something clicked into place inside me. I knew that protecting you was the most important thing I would ever do." "You did protect me," Mary said. "Not just that day, but every day since. You made me feel safe and loved and valued. You gave me a life beyond anything I could have imagined." "We gave each other that," Kyle corrected gently. "This life we built it together. Every decision, every challenge, every triumph. It has always been us, Mary, together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. The desert night was cool and peaceful, filled with the familiar sounds of the ranch settling down for the evening. Horses nickered softly in their corrals, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. "Promise me something," Mary said eventually. "Anything," Kyle replied. "Promise me that no matter what happens, no matter how much time we have left, we will face it together, just like we have faced everything else." "I promise," Kyle said solemnly. "Whatever comes, we face it together." "That is how it has always been, and that is how it will always be." They remained on the porch until the night grew late and the desert cold seeped into their bones. Then they went inside together, to the bedroom they had shared for 4 decades, and lay down in each other's arms just as they had every night since their wedding. The years that followed were gentler, slower. Kyle's health began to fail in his early 70s, the decades of hard work taking their toll on his body. Mary cared for him with the same devotion he had always shown her, and they navigated this new challenge as they had navigated all the others, together and with grace. On a spring morning in 1925, Kyle did not wake up. He passed peacefully in his sleep, with Mary beside him as she had been for 46 years. She held his hand and whispered that she loved him, even though she knew he could not hear. And then she let herself cry for the loss of the man who had been her whole world. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Nevada. Tommy, Katie, and Sam came with their families, and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the church in Belmont. Story after story was shared about Kyle's kindness, his integrity, his skill with horses, and his deep love for his family. Mary sat through it all with dry eyes, having shed all her tears in private, and felt grateful that so many people had known and loved him. They buried him on the hill next to Thomas Edwards, where he could look out over the ranch he had built and the land he had loved. Mary stood at the graveside supported by her children, and she spoke her final goodbye to the man who had changed her life. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. For loving me, for building this life with me, for giving me 46 years of happiness. I will love you until the day I die, and then I will find you again, wherever souls go when they leave this earth. Wait for me, my love. It will not be long." But it was longer than she expected. Mary lived another 8 years, spending her time writing and being with her family. She published one final collection of stories, a series of pieces about life in frontier Nevada and the love she had shared with Kyle. It sold better than any of her previous books, and she liked to think Kyle would have been proud. She passed away in her sleep in the spring of 1933 at the age of 76. Her children found her in the morning, peaceful and still, with a smile on her face. On her nightstand was the old photograph from their wedding day. Kyle young and strong in his best suit, Mary radiant in her mother's dress. They buried her next to Kyle, as she had requested, and the entire family gathered once more to say goodbye to the woman who had been the heart of their family. Tommy, now in his 50s with grandchildren of his own, spoke about his mother's strength and kindness. Katie, tear-stained and grieving, talked about her mother's encouragement and belief. Sam, dignified and eloquent, shared stories of his mother's wisdom and love. But it was Tommy's oldest son, named Kyle after his grandfather, who perhaps said it best. Great-grandma used to tell us about the day Grandpa saved her by the river. She said it was the luckiest day of her life, not because she was saved from danger, but because she met the man she would love forever. She said that real love, true love, changes everything. It gives you courage you did not know you had and makes you better than you would be alone. She and Grandpa had that kind of love, and they built something beautiful with it. All of us exist because of that one day by the river, because a cowboy appeared and changed everything. We should never forget that, and we should honor their memory by loving as deeply and as truly as they loved each other. The family stood together at the graveside, 4 generations of Brennans, all descended from a chance meeting by a river in 1878. They were ranchers and artists and lawyers and teachers and dozens of other things, but they were all connected by the love story that had started it all. As the sun set over the Nevada desert that evening, casting gold and pink across the sky, the family gathered at the ranch house for a meal. They shared stories and memories, laughed and cried, and celebrated the lives of Kyle and Mary Brennan. The ranch would continue, passed down through the generations. The stories would continue, preserved in Mary's books and in the oral traditions of the family. But most importantly, the love would continue, an unbroken thread connecting past to present to future. Because on a day in May 1878, a young woman went to wash clothes by a river. Bandits came and threatened her, and a cowboy appeared and changed everything. He did not just save her life that day. He gave her a life worth living, filled with love and purpose and joy. And she gave him the same gift in return. That was the real magic, the real miracle of their story. Not that they met, but what they built together after they did. A family, a legacy, a love that endured beyond death itself, living on in the hearts and lives of everyone they touched. As night fell over the Brennan Ranch, the stars came out one by one, the same stars Kyle and Mary had watched together for so many years. Somewhere in whatever place souls go when they leave this earth, they were together again, watching their family, proud of what they had built, grateful for the life they had shared. And if you stood very still on that porch where they had spent so many evenings, you might almost hear the echo of their voices on the wind, talking, laughing, planning their next adventure together. Because love like theirs does not end. It transforms, it endures, it becomes something eternal and unbreakable. The cowboy appeared and changed everything. And in changing one woman's life, he changed the lives of generations yet to come. That was the true legacy of Kyle and Mary Brennan. Not the ranch or the horses or the money or the fame. Their legacy was love, pure and simple and everlasting, and that legacy would never die.